Let's watch a few clips from skin deep guest lecturers on what data tells us about children of color in the foster care system and why it matters.
Why are we even talking about children of color in the foster care system? How do children of color, how do different races show up in the foster care system?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I prepared was to look at how many Black, Indigenous, and Latinx children are in foster care, and then thinking about this, looking at our national trends and thinking about it, and starting to delve into that. Why does it matter to even look at, race in child welfare? And so the most recent federal data is from fiscal year 2022. Specifically like September 30th, 22, they look at how many kids are in care, and there were 368,000 kids in foster care. And that number has actually been steadily declining since 2017. And if you look at it by race, you can see of that 368, about 9,000 kids were Indigenous, 83,000, a little over 83,000 were Black. More than 79,000 are Latinx, and then 30,000 or about 30,000 kids were identified as two or more races. Well, what's important though is that, so those are our numbers, and the trend says it's decreasing, but this is happening while the child population is also decreasing. So we have to have a good understanding of our racial equity data in foster care by looking at what's called the Disproportionality Index, which is a really big word, but a very important concept. And so this index compares the percentage that a racial group is in the child population to the percentage that that group is in the foster care population. And if those two numbers are proportionate, the same or close to being the same, then that index is going to be 1. If the index is less than 1, then that racial group is underrepresented in foster care. And then if that number is greater than 1, then they're overrepresented in foster care. And so I'm bringing this up now because nationally we're seeing this decrease in number of kids going into foster care. However, the Disproportionality Index shows us a different trend. And these trends, they vary by state, they vary by local jurisdiction. But at the national level, what we see is that Indigenous children are actually increasing slightly. So keeping in mind, the national trend is numbers going down, but the Disproportionality Index for Indigenous children is increasing each year slightly. So they're overrepresented, and they have the highest disproportionality with regards to overrepresentation, and they have an index of 3. So that means that Indigenous children are in foster care at 3 times the percentage than they are in the child population. Yeah. So it's a very large disproportionate index. For Black children, the Disproportionality Index has remained nearly flat for the last 5 years at about 1.65. So overrepresented at 1.65 at a national level. And then the trend for children who have more than one race is it's almost identical to Black children. And then finally, Latinx children, they're underrepresented in foster care when we look at national data, and that's stayed very, very steady at about 0.85% for 5 years. However, we know with all of these that some states and local jurisdictions are seeing Latinx children be overrepresented. So it's really important. You look nationally, but then you go look at your state and, if you can, your local jurisdiction. Absolutely.
So why does that matter? Why does it matter that children of color are in the foster care system at a higher rate than they're in the population?
Well, I think it matters because we have lots of research that shows us that children who experience the foster care system of all races, that they have poorer outcomes than children who don't experience the foster care system. So poor education outcomes, poor health outcomes, poor mental health outcomes, just employment outcomes. There's so many things. And then, there's also research about foster care being a pipeline to prison. And so there are lots of ways that children are disadvantaged in our foster care system. So the fact that we have children of color, higher proportions of them going in the foster care system, it means they're being set up for experiencing more of these poor outcomes in their future.